Hey everybody, how you doing? Merry Christmas Eve. And if you're all the way around the world, in Australia or Japan, Merry Christmas. Okay, so this is part 2 of the lessons learned video, and I want to share with you the results of the pickup truck testing that I've done. And before I jump into that, I want to talk about something that I think is really important. We focused a lot on the first video about suspension. And we didn't say a whole lot about speed. We acknowledged that, yeah, you need speed, but I want to encourage you on something. It's going to be very hard to see in this video, but this suspension isn't magically soft and spongy. In fact, it's probably very similar to some of the other racing cars that were on my track. The real threat, of course, after a well-tuned suspension is speed. And this is Rubber Toe's Subaru Monster Motorsports. And the reason I'm bringing it to your attention is he has a website. If you go to Monster Motorsports and you search Rubber Toe Rundowns, what you're going to find is a couple of great videos. And they will break down a lot about decals, about paint, and about getting your car prepared to travel fast and straight. If you're a newbie, I highly recommend you search and watch those videos, because you could have a car with excellent suspension, but if you're slow, you're not going to win. So let's talk about the pickups. All right, first you're looking at pictures of the 9 pickup trucks that we tested. And I'm so sorry, this is going to be death by PowerPoint for some of you, because I'm an engineer and this is the way I think. So if you're bored with this video, you're welcome to click it off. It's okay. It won't offend me. I'm going to share with you a grand total of 16 slides. So I'm going to go through this quickly, okay? The first slide has to do with the 8 of the 9 trucks that I am testing. And you can stop the video at any time. These are the 8 trucks, and they range from high-rise trucks like you see the Jeep and the Toyota Land Cruiser and the Dodge D100, to smaller trucks like the Mazda and the Datsun. Okay, and I've got details. SOTB, straight out of the box. That's the weight that was, I took it out of the box, or I took it out of its packaging, I weighed it. The modified is when I put weights on it. And then the percentages, like the Jeep says 60-40, or 40-60, excuse me. And then after I modified it, it says 43-57. Well, that is the front and the rear weight distribution. So the video you're watching now is the Jeep, and you see it comes in at about 51 grams. When I weigh the rear, it's about 28.8. Now we'll flip it around, steady now, and you'll see it comes in at about 22 grams. And that's not ideal, but for the purpose of this study, we're going to give it a go, and maybe it'll teach you a few things. The next slide is vehicle number 9. Vehicle number 9 is the Baja Bouncer that came with rubber tires. And if you're a newbie and you don't realize this, rubber tires are slower than plastic tires. They won't do, in fact, the car will not finish on my track. So you must take out the rubber tires and put in slick plastic ones like I'm showing you here, okay? I did 2 modifications. One, I put the new tires on. That piece in the back, the fake tires, and you can see in this video here, is an aluminum piece. And it's actually part of the post, the rear post, to secure the chassis to the body. Well, this is heavy enough that it really shifts the CG aft. So heavy that I took it out. And you can take it out, and as you see here, you can take it out, and with one post you can still secure, right up here, I put the post in the front, you can still secure the car. Okay, so that's what Mod 2 is. Mod 2 is taking out the post and making it more 50-50 in terms of weight distribution. All right, the next slide is, I call this my suspension rating. All right, this is not to frown upon some builders and praise other builders. It's just meant to say, hey, if I judged you as a 1 or a 0, like in my last video I talked about Lily the dog, very tight suspension. I would call that a 1 or maybe even a 0, okay? Where you can't move the axles or there's very little wiggle room. And there are reasons why experienced builders do this. But for my track, obviously it's not ideal. So what is ideal? A 2, there was some wiggle room. So again, the white car in the middle, Giorgio, he had some wiggle room and he did well. How about the Subaru? You know, Piggy Talil, Monster Motorsports Subaru had I would call it a 2. So it did really well. You know, took second place, probably would have won. Good wiggle. Well, Boxer had really good wiggle. And it was so good that on the Scrambler, that's where he shined. Believe it or not, They See Me Rollin' in the Mercedes-Benz had that kind of a suspension. And then, of course, number 4 is where it's too spongy. You know, again, Joe at Smooth Boy Racing loves to build those things, but he admits wasn't ideal for my track. All right, the next slide has to do with weight distribution. And again, there's a lot of bar charts here, but if you just look at the black dotted line at 50%, what you'll see is that straight out of the box, the blue bar represents, like for truck 1, the Jeep, it represents that it was more tail heavy, okay? And hopefully you see on the left side there of the axes, a tail heavy car. The number 3 on the chart represents its suspension rating. Oh, that's pretty good. A 3 is, yeah, right out of the box. It has a 3. It's good. And then the green bar represents, after I added weight, where the weight distribution went. So it's still tail heavy, but it's less so. And if you look across all the way from 1 through 9, just look at the chart on the left-hand side of this slide, and you'll see, okay, number 6, okay, that's the custom Chevy. Well, it was just about 50-50, and it had a 2 for suspension. That's good. And then I added weight, and I made it more nose heavy. Well, I did that for a reason. Okay? The next slide is the number of DNFs per the 10 runs. I did 5 runs down the joker lane, 5 runs down the drift lane. All of the cars out of the box DNF'd. Yeah, they did. So the green represents what happened when I added weight. And the numbers remind you of what the suspension rating is. Notice that the Datsun has a 0, so it DNF'd 8 out of 10 times. I added weight, it still DNF'd 7 out of 10 times. That might tell you something, okay? On the next slide and this one, I take this one with a grain of salt. The next slide here are finish time comparisons. Now you notice that on the vertical axis finish time, I didn't give you the actual times. It's because it's really not important. Just take a look at the relative time of all 9 pickups. Now you'll notice that the tighter suspension, the ones with a 1 or a 0, tended to be a little faster. Yes, they do, overall, when they finished. Okay? And notice that the black dotted line is probably the average, okay? And that some of them, like the custom Chevy, number 6, was actually kind of slow. And there are reasons why. I'll get into that. Let's talk about each car, 1 through 9. I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. The first one is the Jeep, all right? And the weight distribution and the total weight straight out of the box was 36.5 grams at a 40/60. It was tail heavy. I modified it, bumped it up near 51 grams. It was still a little tail heavy. How did it drift? It was very consistent. What is its suspension rating? It's a 3. It's good. It's very good. How about its speed? It's below average. Yeah. Take a look at the tires and you'll see why. How many DNFs? Well, out of the box it had 4 out of 10. Just by putting weight on it, I dropped it down to 2 out of 10. Okay? The pros and the cons. If you read through this, the modified version, just the modified version, when I added weight, as you see in the picture on the upper right, it had, the CG was lowered. That's a good thing. And it had no more crashes after jumping over the creek or the train. Okay? It only flipped on the scrambler once out of 10 times. And there is room inside this car to make a modified suspension. The cons are it has these knobby plastic tires, and they will slow down the truck a little bit. Not a whole lot, but they do. It's a little bit noticeable. There are slower times, and you notice where I put the weights. If you look at the upper right corner, the weights stick out of the sides of the body. I think that sometimes they were rubbing against the sides of my track, like in the snow section, and actually slowing it down a little bit. Just wanted to let you know about that. So when you see, hey, you modified the car and it actually made it slower, well, there are other factors that played into that. The next one is the Toyota Land Cruiser. It's very similar, right? And so it was somewhat consistent in drifting. The reason it was somewhat is because the modified version was nose heavy, 55/45. Okay? It was below average in speed, and I was able to cut down the DNFs just by adding weight. Take a look at the pros and the cons of the modified version. Yeah, lower CG. It didn't flip over on the scrambler. It didn't flip over anywhere. And it didn't crash over the jumps. And again, the same cons as the first one. The Dodge D100. Love this car. Straight out of the box, nearly 40 grams. I added weight, and I got it pretty close to 50-50, okay? You see 47-53. Very consistent drifting. Like that. Hey, the suspension right out of the box was marginal. Yeah, I give it a 2. The speed was average, and look what happened when I added weight. The DNFs went way down, 1 out of 10, okay? So it didn't tip over anymore. That's the big pro of the modified version. Weight on the bottom is allowed as long as you make it look black and discreet, you know. All right, next one. The Draftnator. Straight out of the box, modified weight. Pretty aft-loaded, as you can see in the pictures. But you know what? Even out of the box, with a very aft-loaded weight, this truck just did well on the track. It was consistent, but because it was so aft-loaded, it would actually overdrift and spin around. And it slowed up its time a little bit because of that. But this car here, oh, and again, the con is you can't have orange tires. It's against the rules. The Draftnator is really, if you're a newbie and you want to just, what pickup should I use? That's a good one to start with. There isn't much modification needed, and it would perform well on the track. This next one, the Studebaker, I love this one. First of all, it's heavy already, so you modify it with some weights and boom, you're right near the upper limit. It's consistent in drifting, but I put the weight in the back, as you see, and I made it very aft-loaded, and it would spin it'd do a 180, and so it slowed up its times a little bit. The suspension is tight. Yes, it's tight. So guess what happened? The DNFs were 6 out of 10 straight out of the box. I added weight. It made it a little better, but still 3 out of 10. So imagine you're in a race with 8 rounds and you DNF twice or 3 times. That's not the ideal scenario. So the pros are you can add weight and you reduce the flipping some. Keep in mind that you have to balance this one pretty close, closer to 50-50 if you want it to perform well overall. The custom Chevy is the next one, and the weight distribution on this one was just about 50-50. Oh, I modified it, made it a little nose heavy. I know the weight. Check out where I put the weight. I didn't want to make it aft heavy. The suspension is a 2. It's marginal. Drifted consistently, believe it or not, at 55 and 45. It was a little bit, it underdrifted one time, and the DNFs did lower, but it was still 3 out of 10. Now, pros and cons. Without any modifications, it would stall on the track. Well, I added weight, and it still stalled on the track. It was slower when I added weight. I suspect the reason is because the axles, and just maybe the build quality, isn't up to par. It made it, I think there are other reasons. You could put new axles on this Chevy, for example, and get much better results. So I'm not sure this slide is very useful. All right. The Mazda, the REPU, or REPU, it was very consistent in drifting. Okay, so it was just under 50 grams when I added weight. You notice that I put the weight in the bed of the truck, so I made it really aft-loaded, like, whoa, that's crazy, and it still drifted really well. Go figure. Probably because it's less than 50 grams. And if I were near 60 grams, it probably would spin around, just saying. The DNFs, well, hey, it was faster than average, and the DNFs went from 4 out of 10 to 1 out of 10, even with the weight in the bed of the pickup. Adding the weight stabilized it. One subscriber was afraid that an aft-loaded pickup would make it crash on the scrambler. It didn't crash on the scrambler. It made it overall faster, and it made it down the scrambler. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so just for some of you, if you want to put weight in the trunk in the bed of the pickup and make it aft-loaded, depending on the pickup, you can probably do a good job with this. I put for a con, it was too aft-loaded for the snowy undulations. And that's because what would happen is the front end, so the front end would it'd come up over an undulation, the front end would pop up a little bit. And you might remember Giorgio, the very last race of the final, he popped up, and what happened to him? Well, he flipped over and he took 3rd place instead of possibly winning. Now, he's not aft-loaded, but what I'm saying is your odds of it happening go up. The second to last one is the Datsun 610. Very similar in size and shape, to the Mazda, but check out the results. It was completely different, and I think it was because the suspension is so tight. It overdrifted, it had a whole lot of DNFs, it was the fastest truck I tested, and so yes, the pro is it's very fast with the added weight. and the cons are too much, too tight, too many DNFs, and an aft-loaded pickup. So what it tells me, this tells me suspension is really critical, okay? That the final one is the Baja Bouncer, my favorite. I love this one. And you'll notice the Mod 1 with this aluminum fake tire rear post in is 3664, very off-loaded. I took it out, and I took out basically 7 grams or more. And it went from an aft-loaded vehicle to 4654, just a little bit aft-loaded, but much better, okay? It was consistent on the drift pad, yay! The suspension, right? No modification, just the suspension as is. I'll give it a 2. And the DNFs went from 4 out of 10 with Mod 1 to 2 out of 10 with Mod 2. So comparing the two, it got better, okay? The pros, you can read them right there. It's a metal chassis and a metal body, so you don't need to add much weight. And the plastic wheels lock into place nicely with, number 2, suspension rating. The cons, well, if I had continued to bump up the weight to 58 grams, it probably would have been even faster. And it got stuck in the big U once because it's such a long body, it slid out and it got trapped. I don't think that's going to happen very often. Just wanted to point that out. It got stuck once because of that. In conclusion, thanks for bearing with me. The conclusions. A tight suspension kills. The biggest influence on track performance is a tuned suspension. Aim for a rating of 3 or 2. Okay? Don't make it too spongy. A 4. Don't get too carried away. And don't glue or make it so tight. However you do it, you guys, you experienced builders, don't make it so tight that it's a 1 or 0. Aim for a 2. High-rise trucks with weight under the chassis greatly enhance their stability with fewer DNFs. Yes. Number 3, a very consistent drifting and minimal DNFs. If you want to target that, you got to have a 50-50 weight distribution. If your truck weighs nearly 58 grams, try to avoid an aft-loaded truck more than 60% at the back. If it's front-loaded, avoid it, the front loading being more than 55%. Replace the rubber tires with plastic knobby tires. That's still not ideal. Or the plastic slicks like this guy. Yes, do this. Very important. Research advice from experienced racers. The videos that I referenced already. You got to make it travel fast. You got to make it travel in a straight line. I can't tell you how many cars didn't quite travel in a straight line from time to time down the runway. They would spin, lose their momentum, and that cost them time. Okay? Hey, I hope this is helpful to you all. Sorry it's a long video. Have a Merry Christmas. Take care.